This is Designing Security Products, and that's where we talk about the intersection of cybersecurity, research, and product design. And today I'm talking with Stefan Walter, who is the head of UX at Ticura. So, hi, Stefan. Thanks for meeting with me today.
Hi, William. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Uh,
I'm Stefan Walter, as you said. I'm one of the 6 founders of Ticura. We started in 2022 as a startup here in Kassel in the center of Germany. With our 6 co-founders, I worked before at IBM Security, also in Kassel, also in the security area. Our service is an aggregated view of all the threat intelligence which is out there, and we monitor those sources, and then we create a recommendation just for you or your company, your environment, or your specific products we use. And that the whole thing should be very painless to use, one click integration. And if you need something special, we always can provide that for you.
okay. So, I heard you say cybersecurity, painless for the user, and one click. Those are things that don't necessarily always go together, right?
No, that's why we see also a market for us. So, like when you try to integrate additional feeds in your, for example, firewall, it's always, I don't know if it's censored here in that podcast, a pain in the beep. And
I
that's
think
what
we
we're
can all fill
trying.
in that
Okay, that's what we're trying to mitigate. So the consumer shouldn't care about the sources. We tell them a recommendation,
blank.
what sources we think are the best for their environment, and then we just provide it in the format your products use. And if you need to change it somewhere later in time, so you need additional feeds, we can say that, hey, there are some new feeds which might be better for you. Would you integrate them in your subscription? And then it's integrated, and you don't have to do anything on your end. So the integration still works.
Okay, great.
That's the gist behind what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were talking before a little bit about how you guys got started into this and kind of how you got into the whole security world. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, we started also as a small startup in Kassel back in, I think I joined in 1999. We got acquired by Internet Security Systems, which is Georgia, Atlanta based. And a few years later, Internet Security Systems was bought by IBM. And then we were always kind of in the security world. So we had a spam filter solution, web application firewall, all that stuff. And I think in 2014 we started with a threat intelligence portal named Xforce.io. You can reach it still. So we had to hand that over to another team because IBM decided at some point in time to close down our location because of global strategies. The smaller locations got closed and it was all merged into the bigger ones. So that's where the thought of why not try to make a startup was planted in our minds. And yeah, that's how it started. So that was one
Fantastic.
good thing because uh, all the founders of Ticura worked together for such a long time and were like experts in their own area. So, for example, me, I'm obvious front end user experience. We have a database expert. We have a guy who scouts for new threat intelligence sources, machine learning experts, all that stuff. So we pretty much have an expert in every area.
Yeah, that sounds like I was reading an article recently that was talking about unfair advantages, and it was actually putting a positive spin, like everyone has unfair advantages. And
Yeah.
as I'm hearing you tell this story, it makes me think about, man, how many startups are there where the team knows each other and has worked together for multiple years
Yeah.
on starting on day one, right? Like they've got this history, they've got this trust that's built in, and so that just seems like a fantastic unfair advantage for you guys, right? Versus any other startup that has to kind of figure out how they work together.
Yeah, we know each other. Like each one has some strange behavior, whatever. So we know that, and we totally can rely on each other. So it's also no problem if people work from home. We already say it's like We got 2 new employees,
Mhm.
which with whom we worked before. So we
Okay.
asked, "Hey, we know each other. Do you want to join us?" And that worked again. So
Yeah.
we still can, we still have access to the old resources, so to say.
Fantastic, fantastic. So you are a co-founder, and then also you come from a UX UI background. So is that something that you have seen since you've been in the security world for a while? Is that typical? Is that something that's unusual? Or
I must admit I haven't seen it, but I'm also not on the lookout for how the each new startup is set up, so to say. But I think having a UX person on your team doesn't matter on if you're a founder or not. But I think that's super important, especially as we're trying to make it easy to consume the threat intelligence. And you can't say that everything in this security world is super easy to grasp and
right?
super usable.
Yes, and I would say just because of what we do, it seems like that is not the case a lot of times where UX and UI is brought in later on, right?
Yeah,
So maybe around the A round of funding or after they've been around for over a year, they have the first version of the product.
yeah,
Then they say, okay, now it's time for us to bring in some research and I feel like sometimes they want us to make the product look pretty,
yeah,
and so there has to be a conversation of that's not really what we do, or that's
yeah,
certainly not the goal of what we do, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Bringing that in that after a while doesn't work. It's the same with accessibility. If you don't have that in your mind when you start, it's super hard to add that back in at
Mhm.
a later point in time.
Yes, yes, that's right. That's right. So I guess I've got some questions I'd love to ask you and get your take on this.
Yeah,
Tell me a little bit about your normal process of. I'm assuming, do you guys work in sprints, or how
yeah.
do you guys?
We work in 2 week sprints,
Okay.
agile methodology, but we pick from that whole thing what works for us. So we're not super dogmatic. I don't like all that rules. It stands in the Agile Manifesto on page 244, and you can't do that because of this and that. So we pick the parts which work for us, which we think are super useful. So we like Agile. Don't get me wrong, but you can always overdo it. So we come from a big company, and we had that how is it called,
Hmm.
safe scalable agile framework, which just my personal opinion is it's super overhead. So we have scrum
Okay.
of scrums, and people talk to each other, and sometimes you get the feeling because of all the talking, nothing happens anymore. So what we try to do is show things early to customers, or we call it design partners when we started. So we had some super friendly, nice people who always are willing to have a look at things we're working on, and we try to get the feedback, even if it's not 100% perfect. So it's like that we always communicate. This is something we work on. How do you think it looks? How do you think it works? Does that help you? And like that iterative process, I think we embrace in our team a lot.
And so, how early are you showing concepts to your design partners or to potential customers? Is
Yeah.
it like at the sketch and wireframe phase, or is it more finalized designs that could go to production? Or
It's more in the phase of working HTML prototypes in the product.
okay,
So we made the experience if we showed wireframes and the sketches. So we used balsamic mockups a lot before. This works great for internal use. So we
mm,
sometimes we attach those mockups to the user stories so that everybody has an idea of how it looks like. But we made the experience if we show those lo-fi sketches to customers, they don't get that connection between this is just a sketch
mm,
and how it would look like. So they get caught up on details like colors or something, and it doesn't look like this with those quickly lines. No, right? No, it doesn't. But that's why we started making some HTML mock-ups. So we
okay,
what we usually do is we create a prototype which is feature flagged on some instance, so we can demo that to users, and how you use that feature is shown. It's all mock data. For example, we integrated the allow deny lists for our subscription, so you can put things on lists, so to
Okay.
say. And we made a prototype of that. You click on something, you see the new entry, you can delete it, you can edit it, you can switch between the different types of lists. And that was that state which we showed to other people to get some feedback. And
Okay.
with all those UI libraries, so for example, we use Beautify, it's not a big deal to create a prototype of that thing without API connections, all that stuff. It's like a hi-fi prototype.
Okay. Okay. Great. And I know one of the things we talked about before is you were talking about the concept of that you guys use the cupcake method. And so I'd love for you
Yeah,
to unpack that a little bit. Tell us what is the cupcake method?
yeah. I think that was like a term we used a lot in IBM. So we try to slice bigger work items into more consumable parts. So we need a place where to start with, which already brings value to the user, but it's a very basic user experience. So then the next step would be the birthday cake, I think it was, and then the wedding cake, which grows in features and all that stuff. But for me, that's one of the big topics. When this doesn't work right, you are always stuck with the most minimal version. Or if you don't think of the next iterations, you don't maybe think of technical limitations you could easily bring in already in the cupcake model, but then build upon that. So that's what we are trying to do a lot. Is like when we define that cupcake to get a quick start in some like feature or whatever, we try to always think of how to iterate on that when we come back later. So we create at least placeholder stories for the next iterations, that when you look at the backlog, you see how we thought at that point in time it should evolve, and we always could reiterate on that if requirements change or whatever, which always happens. But at least we have a plan, and that,
Gotcha.
in our experience, helped a lot.
Okay, great, great. And one of my favorite things about the cupcake analogy is that the cupcake has all of the elements that are there,
Mhm.
but it's just you've limited the number of people that it feeds, right? So it's not, no one wants a dry cake that feeds 20 people, right?
Yeah,
That's not very
yeah.
interesting, but a
Without value,
cupcake has,
it doesn't work. Yeah,
right,
you need.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Great. So are there any helpful techniques or methods that you use at Ticura with your team?
Yeah, coming from, also, I always have to refer to IBM because it was like, let me think, 14 years I think of IBM, and they had a big uh, design initiative at one point in time, and they coined also the enterprise design thinking
Okay.
methodology. You can cut that out. And I liked some of the exercises they created there. So for me, it was always that the whole design thinking thing was like a guided brainstorming. So you
Mm,
don't even recognize why you're doing this, only when you think about the exercises a bit more. So what we did a lot at IBM and also in Ticura is we started with a user journey map, like go through the stages of when the user is trying to fulfill one task. Then think of where the pain points are, what could be improved, and also what doesn't need to improve because it's already no pain for the user. And then focus on the pain points, and then we switch to the it was in the IBM world, it was called big ID vignettes.
okay.
So you create like with two post-its, you create not features, but you create more like epics. So it's not super detailed, not technical things. And the most important thing, you don't have the feasibility in mind. You just think of this would help the user and don't think about is it doable or not.
Right.
So that doesn't limit you when thinking of possible solutions. And also, you don't have that blocker in mind. That doesn't work because of XYZ and this technology. Totally technology unrelated, so to say. And then when we collected all those big ideas on a whiteboard, we switched to the priority map, and then we put those ideas into places. It was like on the x-axis. I think it was the feasibility of the item. Like on the right, it was easy. On the left, it was hard. And on the y-axis, we have it doesn't on the bottom it was a low value to the user, and on the top it was high value to the user. And then we put those big ideas on the board, and then we had at least some priorities, because the ones on the bottom left you don't want to tackle because it doesn't bring any value. It might be easy, but it doesn't bring any value. So you try to focus on the top right was easy because that was easy and brings a lot of value. But then we already have the bit harder, but also brings value to the user. So that helped a lot, because prioritizing is another thing which is really hard, especially in startup phase. The limits are usually, at least for us, it's money and time. So at least that time thing we could tackle with that approach.
So you mentioned that time and money for a startup are always
Mm.
kind of a limiting factor. Was that also the case though when you were at IBM? Obviously, that's a huge organization. Do they
Yeah,
have the same constraints, or was it very different?
there it was different. You said it's a bigger company, or a big company, and we had the luxury of having multiple day workshops. In our startup phase, we don't have that luxury anymore, so we try to trim it down to the most essential parts. So, like user research, also a bit time consuming. So we try to put this into interviews and demos with customers and pick the things they say as a feedback for us. So it's always a bit limited, but it is how it is.
Yes, yes. So when you are creating the user experience and creating the user interface for the product, how important do you think the research part of that process is? Because what I hear a lot is it seems like there's a lot of security companies that don't really emphasize that part. It's more like we know what our customers want, and so we're just going to go ahead and design that, and then we'll build it, and then we'll show it to customers. So,
Yeah,
how
everybody,
important do you think the research part is?
I think it's very important, because honestly, most people think they know what the users will do, but also we made the experience. We didn't know that. I think we come to that later. So the only thing I can think of what helps here is, like, you have to start with something, show it to the users, get feedback. The multiple time repeated fail early, fail often, that
Right.
it is like it is. So show things to the user, and they will come back most of the times when they don't like something. So the praise doesn't get overthrough, but if there is something wrong, they will tell you. And with that prototyping, showing them early to the design customers, what we call them in our case, I think that also helps a lot to be on the right track, at least. So you always have to adjust the way a bit, but that helps.
And so, how do you balance the tactical side of, hey, here's this feature, we need to do some research, we need to design for the user to be able to accomplish this goal? How do you balance that with more of the strategic, where you're kind of up 10,000 feet and you're looking strategically at the larger goals that the customer is trying to accomplish?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a pretty filled backlog, and every time we get user feedback, we try to map that to the things we already have on our plate. So we try to adjust stories if some feature wishes always come very often or very frequently. We try to listen, but we try also to say no, or let's wait with this a bit more. We have something in our mind. Maybe that will help you. Otherwise, you will end up with multiple checkboxes, radio buttons, select boxes, where you can see every feature request ever came in. So you have to say no sometimes.
So, when you're talking about talking with customers, how challenging is it to to find the people to test with, to set up those meetings, to run the meetings? Is one part of that more challenging than the other?
Most of the times, a colleague of mine is doing those demos, but we sync before the demos a lot. So immediately after the demo is over, we sit together and discuss the feedback we got, or find items where we have to adjust a bit. We don't want to put everyone of us in all those meetings. Sometimes I'm in those, but not always. But usually we don't have any problems getting feedback.
Okay.
Just collecting, categorizing, mapping with, as you said, with a higher picture from 10,000 feet above.
Yeah. So are you typically going back to the same users, the folks that are in the design partner organizations?
Yeah,
So
most of the
are,
times. Yeah.
okay. And then how often are you mixing in new people that maybe this is their first time to experience the product?
Depends on when we have new context where we doing those demos. We ask them if they're interested in like providing feedback, maybe be a part of our prioritization list, and we just ask that. If you have some new context, we ask if they're interested. Then we extend the range of design partners.
That's great. That's great. So I would love to hear some stories, some personal stories about maybe something that went incredibly right, or something that went incredibly wrong, and how you adjusted, or maybe even something that was just completely different than what you were expecting to have.
Okay, so some anecdotes. Yeah, one funny thing is we started Ticura with a design thinking workshop, also internally for the six of us. It was no big deal because everyone worked at IBM before and was knowing what to expect from a design workshop. So no, this is a Sharpie and what do I have to do with that? So it just was a head start. So that was no issue. But you also started, as I said before, with the user journey mapping, find out places where people have problems. It was like we didn't have real users at that time, so we just brought in our experience from working with customers before, where they have pain, like integrating new feeds into their appliances, which is always difficult. So that was uh, a good experience. A bad experience was like when we create those recommendations, we need some user data from their environment. So we assumed it was a good idea that they provide us log files. And then we analyzed those log files, pass them, see in what sources we monitor, also see those items, and we thought it was a good way to start with a log file. But we didn't thought about like in those log files are, for example, sensitive data. They have to be a specific format, and people were hesitant to provide us log files. So real world log files. So that was our assumption where we were wrong. So we had to think of other ways how to get data which we can use for a recommendation. So we didn't ditch the log file upload, but we also added more items like provide us some what products do you use, in what geos you're interested in data for some specific industries. That's the word I was looking for. So like we have broadened the entrance to Ticura instead of just relying on log files. So that was an assumption where we were totally wrong.
Okay.
But when we noticed that, we could react to that.
So what was the time delay, let's say, between when you had this assumption and then you tested it with, or you validated or invalidated it with users? Was that a long time? Was that a
No, it
short
was
time?
very short because we always heard, I don't have log files. Oh, we have to think of cleaning them up before we upload it to your service. Like we are a startup, nobody knew us, and who big companies want to provide those startups log files with probably sensitive data in it. So we noticed that very early, I would say, and we integrated all the other measures to get data from them.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a fantastic example of because you had a tighter feedback loop with customers,
Yeah.
you were able to adjust faster, and you talked about time and money. So that, I'm sure that saved you a lot of time and money, especially at the very, very beginning.
Yeah,
Those
absolutely.
resources are so incredibly valuable and hard
Yeah.
to come by,
Yeah,
right?
and as I said, the good thing is we don't have to throw that away, but we just had to think about other ways
Mm.
to tackle that issue. So it's still there. You can provide us log files, but it's not the only thing.
Those are great stories, great stories. So I've got a few more questions I'd love to ask. One is, so I know that you've been in this space for quite a while. So if you could go back and give yourself some advice when you first got started working in UX security, what advice would you give yourself?
I would say don't overthink, have a vision, but know where to start and just start. Build something, build a prototype, test it out on the user. Even if the feature is not there, you will get, yeah, we don't need it. We don't need it, but also we need it when it's available. So that's always a good sign. Then when people ask, I've seen that feature, is it already available? And that's good because you always could be blocked by maybe two big work items. Just find a way where to start, do something, and learn to master the art of slicing those stories into different cake things.
That sounds like fantastic advice. I'm sure that it would have helped you a lot, right? If you could go back
Yeah,
and give yourself that advice.
yeah. Usually, engineers always overthink and think of every edge case which could happen, and it's not per se bad, but you always run into the danger that you block yourself totally instead of just developing a cool feature and think of the problems later. We
Yeah,
are
what is it?
pragmatic.
Right. What it was the phrase is that necessity is the mother of invention, and
Yeah,
so there's something to be said for you kind of put yourself in a situation again, building up maybe a little bit of risk, right? Not that it's gonna, if we get this wrong, the company's gonna fail,
yeah,
but sometimes putting yourself in a situation where you have to figure it out
yeah,
forces you to think about options that you might not have naturally thought of.
yeah. And that's one thing which we totally love about that agile thing because you can react very quickly. In 2 week sprints, you can adjust the direction a lot. And there is a reason why that Agile Manifesto was created back then. In my opinion, it just gets too industrialized and it's getting too complicated sometimes.
And I agree with that. And I think that, we've had an opportunity to work with a lot of different companies, and most of them, I would say, the engineering team is using some type of an agile approach. Now,
Mm.
what that means, there's 1,000 different flavors of agile and how it's actually implemented in the organization. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at that manifesto, it's 7 items, I think. I'm not totally sure. It's super minimal and it addresses all the issues still very good in my opinion, but there is a whole industry with you can get certified here and this is a super special approach and I'm always a bit allergic to that dogmatic approaches of that. Pick whatever you think works for you and get some experience with it. It's not very different from the how to create a product, I would say.
absolutely. All right, one last question for you. So, what is one thing that you wish early stage founders knew about product design?
It's also a bit related to the thing I mentioned before, just start. But one advice I would say is very important is don't say yes to anything because you will end up in feature raiders, but just have a vision and a mission for yourself, for your company, and then always align that feedback with that. So you, as I said, learn to say no sometimes.
And so, no specifically to potential customers. Is that what you're?
If some potential customers with a background we don't support, I think we would also say no, but this was more related to I need this feature tomorrow, but maybe he needs something different, which we already had in mind and which will also help him. So just don't add radio buttons if one customer's wishes for
Okay.
that.
Yeah, in early stage companies, it seems like there's always this tension between here's our vision for the product, but then here's this person over here that said they'll write a check for us if we'll create this feature, and if we there's always a balance because if you don't get revenue in, then there's no company, right? Like
Sure,
you don't get a chance to
sure.
build anything.
Yeah.
So there's
But yeah,
Yeah, there's
It's a
tension between the
balance.
two.
You have to learn that.
That's right. That's right. Awesome.
And if lots of people want a specific feature you don't want to make it, you should also question yourself.
Hmm.
Maybe I am wrong. If so many people request it, then let's implement that.
Sure. Sure. See if it fits in with your vision for the product, or you can adjust the vision for your product, right? I mean, I think
Sure.
about a bunch of products that are out there that the company started being something vastly different, and
Yeah.
then they just adjusted because they said, hey, we thought we were going to build this, but we thought we were going to build a video game, but it turns out I think
Ended
that's
up
the
with a
story of
movie.
Slack,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Slack was going to build a video game, and
Okay.
then they built
Didn't
this
know that.
communication device to be able to talk with one
Okay.
another internally, and that became so powerful. They're like, oh, we'll just build this instead.
Yeah. Oh, didn't know that.
The company Slack did not start out trying to create what Slack is today
Okay.
of communication, team communication. So that wasn't their main focus.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Stefan, it has been so great talking with you today and getting your perspective. You have a ton of experience in this area, and so it's been great hearing your stories.
Perfect. Thanks for inviting me.